This is a map of all of the world's telephone country codes. You might even recognize your own, but it doesn't make sense because if every country has a country code, why are the US and Canada both number 1? If there's a number 1 and a number 7, why is there no 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, or 9? Why is Greenland grouped in with Africa? Why was France 33rd in line for a country code? And why was the UK 44th? How did they even decide what countries were even countries? Like Taiwan, who say they're an independent country, but China says they're part of China. Is it political? Is it to do with cables? Only one way to find out. The story starts with mysterious buildings, like this one. At first glance, it looks like maybe an office building. But then you look closer and you see that their front door isn't actually a door, and some of their windows aren't windows, and that this is in fact Houston Telephone Exchange. Before international calls were automated, you'd need to call an operator and tell them who you were trying to call. Can you tell them what happened next? These guys would link you up with them manually using copper cables, sometimes via several other countries, and you'd be on an apparently very noisy international call in no time. I'm gonna hang up now. And this worked well, until about 1956 when they put a big cable at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean connecting the UK and the USA. Suddenly everyone wanted to call everyone, not just locally, but all around the world, all of the time, and connecting all of these calls manually started to look like a silly idea. Luckily, there was already a great system rolling out in the UK in 1958 called subscriber trunk dialing, or STD. The US also had STDs in 1958, but they decided to call it direct distance dialing, or DDD, disappointingly. This meant that callers could dial a number consisting of an area code and a subscriber number and be automatically connected to another phone. The most practical way to automate international calls would then be to add another area code onto the start of each number. But cooperation isn't always the world's strong point. So who was going to decide who got what number? Luckily, there was already an organisation that was good at things like this. They were called the International Telecommunications Union, or ITU, founded in 1865 by a bunch of European countries to deal with telecom-y things, and by this point, part of the UN. And also kind of unrelated to the big tall telecoms tower behind me. The ITU was suggested, and no one had a better idea, so everyone agreed. And they got to work deciding what numbers. We need the map for this bit. They split the world into areas based on existing telecommunication systems, the cables and all that, which loosely correlated to continents but also took into account some political history too. The US and Canada already had a numbering plan that they called the North American Numbering Plan, where all of the numbers started with a 1. So they got to keep that. We'll come back to that. Then, geographically left to right, the continent called Africa got number 2, which they subdivided so each country got 2 digits or 3. Europe had quite a lot of big and powerful countries, so they were assigned 3 and 4, so there was more space for more countries to have 2-digit country codes. Then things appeared to go in the opposite direction. Over to South and Central America, who got 5, also subdivided. Over to Southeast Asia and Oceania, who got 6, subdivided. Then Russia and neighbouring regions, which was then the USSR, at 7. Across to East Asia and Southeast Asia at 8, subdivided. And West, Central and South Asia, who got 9. Subdivided. Whew. We'll never know officially why each zone got each number. I mean, if they turned around to countries and said, we gave you this number because we don't think you're very cool, countries probably wouldn't be that happy about it. But one popular theory suggests that 3 and 4 were lower numbers and at the top of the rotary phones, and therefore they were more desirable. Maybe Europe wanted them, but I can't find any actual evidence of that. So while they decided on the zones, deciding who got put in what zone was not going to be easy, as they're about to find out. Greenland is in the continent of North America geographically, but politically it's been part of the Kingdom of Denmark in Europe since 986. So naturally its country code is 2 for Africa. Europe was simply rather full and Greenland didn't have an existing phone connection to North America or Europe. Africa had space, so they just tagged it on the end at 299. It's a similar case with the Faroe Islands at 298. The British Indian Ocean Territory is sort of Africa adjacent. Politically it's British, which is Zone 4, but the island directly above it is part of Zone 9. In this case, it wasn't really integrated with anywhere, so again, they put it with Africa in Zone 2 because it had space. But no one really uses it because it doesn't have a civilian population. 297 sits all the way over here, surrounded by 1s and 5s. This one's Aruba. It used to be part of the Netherlands Antilles, a former Dutch Caribbean territory, which used 599. When Aruba became its own telecommunication system, it got its own country code. Again, Africa had space, so it was assigned 297. And this was one of the easier political changes to manage when it came to country codes. Sometimes the world changes, and the collapse of the Soviet Union caused quite a kerfuffle. In fact, when the Soviet Union collapsed, almost everyone chose to be reassigned to a new zone, most going to 3 with Europe, or 9 with West, Central and South Asia. But Kazakhstan's network was so tied up with Russia's that changing all of the numbers would have just been a nightmare. So 7 is shared between just Russia and Kazakhstan. Oh my god, wait, I'll call you back. Country codes do help us stay in touch with the rest of the world, but they don't help us stay connected to the internet when we travel without paying ridiculous rates. The same can't be said about today's sponsor, eSIM.io. All you gotta do is download the app, tell them where you're going, select your package, and install your eSIM. They offer time-based data plans, or with their pay-as-you-go option, if you've got balance left over at the end of your trip, you can use it on your next one. And with their one SIM feature, you don't need to install a new SIM every time you buy a new package. You install one SIM, keep it for life, and your app switches automatically between over 190 countries. That's great for short trips and stopovers. If you're interested, visit their website or download their app from the link in the description. Oh, and they just said that you can use the code LUKE5 at checkout to get a bonus on your balance. Thanks, guys. In fact, even deciding what countries were actually countries was proving tricky, because giving a country code pretty strongly implied that it was an independent country. Here are some examples for you to watch from your country. Taiwan says that it's an independent country, but China says that it's part of China. That's why this isn't the Taiwan embassy in London, it's the Taipei representative's office in London. That's a tricky one for a system that's supposed to represent every single person on the planet to figure out. The ITU couldn't list Taiwan as a sovereign country without taking sides, but Taiwan does have a separate telecoms network to China. So the ITU gave it the code 886, but listed it as Taiwan, China. This allowed it to get its own independent country code without recognizing its autonomy. And when Kosovo declared independence from Serbia in 2008, it wasn't universally recognized, but they did have their own telecoms network. For years, Kosovo was forced to use different countries' country codes. Serbia's, a bit awkwardly, Slovenia's, and Monaco's. But in 2016, it was agreed that the ITU would issue 383 to Kosovo without recognizing it as a sovereign state, just a separate telecoms network. So now that we know the zones and who actually needs country codes, how do we decide who gets what number within each zone? Very good question. Well, to start, larger countries got smaller country codes, and smaller countries got larger country codes. This was the only way to ensure that everyone got a country code, but that the majority of phone numbers were as short as possible. Again, despite what Reddit says, there is no official reasoning. Believe me, I've looked. But of the original country codes published in 1960, only 6 countries still use the original code. Those are the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Germany, Sweden, and Greece. And some theorize they hung on to these for a reason. One popular theory is that 33 and 44 were the most desirable numbers in the European zone because they were the same number twice and therefore easier to remember. Wait, didn't I say I was going to talk more about the North American numbering plan? Oh yeah! The North American numbering plan was around before the ITU's country codes, but not everyone was a fan. Even though it looks like the US and Canada are just number 1, if you look down here, you can see that the number 1 is actually followed by an area code. This meant that each state got its own unique code, but also that all the other countries in the North American numbering plan also got their own code. Not everyone wanted in though. St. Pierre and Miquelon are in North America geographically, but politically, they're French. They didn't want to join the North American numbering plan, but it also didn't make sense to put them under France's domestic code. So they grouped them in with the rest of the Americas in Zone 5. I think it's time for a quick fire round. Hi there, I was just wondering, does the Antarctic have a country code? No country is allowed to own any part of Antarctica, so each base just uses the code of the country that runs it. Hey mate, does Vatican City have a country code if it's a country within the city of Rome within the country of Italy? It does, 379, but most calls go through Italy's 39. How did they decide what numbers the islands right out in the middle of the ocean got? Remote islands don't necessarily get numbers based on where they are geographically, but more to do with who set up their telecoms network. So, for example, Guam, all the way over here, is part of the North American numbering plan because the US set up their networks. But French Polynesia over here is 689 because they run off Pacific networks. Can country codes die? No, they are not alive, but they can stop existing, like 37 for East Germany, 38 for Yugoslavia, and 42 for Czechoslovakia, countries which also stopped existing. Are we almost finished talking about country codes? Maybe, but what's next for country codes? There's been a few developments in the way that we call each other over the years. Over in Zone 8, there's a whole experimental special services set that went down about as well as Windows Phone did. 800 is the Universal International Free Phone Service, which was supposed to be a single toll-free number you could dial from any country. But this was confusing for both carriers and callers, so people just used the local ones instead, like 0800 in the UK or 1-800 in North America. 870 is for global satellite phones, and 878 was an ambitious idea for a global personal number you kept for life, which sounds about as convenient as it does inconvenient. It's basically dead now, but something that did catch on was VoIP, which is basically calling people using the internet rather than traditional phone infrastructure, like Wi-Fi calling, WhatsApp calling, or even video calling. None of these technically even require a phone number. So are country codes on their way out? Probably not. In 1997, the ITU issued new guidance reframing phone numbers from instructions for a physical line to being more like names, a way of really easily identifying who was calling you no matter where they are in the world. This was a pretty massive change because it meant you no longer needed to have a physical line to have a phone number. So today, while a lot of the original wires and switches are gone, our phone numbers still work. We keep country codes and phone numbers not because we really need them, but because we understand them already, and changing the system would just be a lot of admin. Telephone exchanges like this one don't just connect our phones anymore, but our internet too. Different technology, same idea, and probably here to stay, I would imagine. In all seriousness, what is absolutely mad is that the whole world managed to band together and create a system which has been used for decades. Every country has a country code, no country has ever opted out or come up with a different system. Looking at a map of country codes, you're not just looking at a guide, but potentially one of the most impressive political compromises of all time. It represents a globalized world and an overwhelming desire to connect. That is impressive.